Hello and welcome to 68 Cups of Blueberry Tea with your host, Gabrielle Knipe. Today, I catch up with Nick Hunter, who is busily shaping the world of sports from Canberra. Started by representing Australia at the 1986 Edinburgh Commonwealth Games, to coaching at the 2012 London Paralympics for both rowing and equestrian, and now serving on the World Rowing Umpiring Commission. Nick's contributions span athlete development, officiating, and sports administration. In this episode, we'll explore his multifaceted career, delving into his coaching philosophies, leadership roles, and the legacy he's building within the Australian sporting landscape. Join me at our humble rowing shed at the Australian National University. Alrighty. So, Nick, thank you for joining me here at the ANUBC. Normally we cross paths at about 6 a.m. in the morning, but the sun is well risen, beautiful day. So here we are. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Gabby.
I have a lot for you, Nick Hunter.
Okay.
I'm ready for you. Are you ready for me?
No, I'm a little bit apprehensive about how many skeletons you found in my closet. So.
Okay, well, to start off, let's see how we go.
Okay.
So, Nick, you have been a very valiant figure in the Australian rowing community for over 4 decades. From athlete to coach, administrator to umpire, your journey is nothing short of inspiring. So let's start at the beginning. What first drew you to the world of sports, and how did your early experiences shape your passion for rowing?
All right. Well, perhaps I'll put that as how I started in rowing.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely.
So when I was about 3, my parents had a babysitter who was a rower from Adelaide University Boat Club. I grew up in Adelaide. And he planted the idea of, just while he was babysitting, sort of planted the idea of rowing. And I thought, I think I'd like to do that. A little bit further down the track, my parents used as one of their selling points to get me to go to the school I was going to go to. It was a school where I was going to be able to row. And years later, my mother would occasionally tell the story about how I came home pretty despondent after my first day there because they didn't offer rowing in grade 1. So anyway, I had to wait until the under-14s. I did do tennis up to that point very badly. So the day I was old enough to start rowing in the under-14s in year 8 at school, my John Newcomb Junior Special tennis racket went in the racket press, and it's still in that racket press today because I've been rowing ever since.
And were there any other sporting activities until you were able to get into rowing?
Yes, I grew up in a figure skating family. So the whole family was involved in figure skating in South Australia. So my brother and sister and I, my father was the president of the state association, and Mum would make the costumes for the big ice show at the end of the year. So I, of my siblings and I would say I was easily the worst at it, but we all did it, and so yes, it was certainly a very humbling experience being beaten by your little brother in the state championships. But anyway, that's all part of learning in life. So yes, so ice skating.
Ice skating. Well, the tennis racket was put to rest.
Yeah.
Have the ice skates been put to rest as well?
Yes, there was a crossover period when I was both rowing very busily and skating as well as in my last couple of years of school, but the rowing was starting to escalate, and that was sort of becoming my interest. I did feel like I sort of reached my very low ceiling in figure skating. I did get across to, because my strength was starting to build at that stage, especially through the rowing training. So I did get into ice dance, where you're actually doing lifts of your partner. So the Torval and Dean sort of thing, not quite as good as them. And so that was probably my last couple of years. I was doing ice dance and getting into the judging side. But then, the big change in everybody's life is, you leave school and you start university. I moved interstate to go to university, and that's when kind of I started to shift across to just the rowing completely.
Fully committing to the rowing.
Yep.
Well then, reflecting on your early days as a schoolboy rower, what lessons did you carry forward into your later career?
Perseverance. So it actually took me 5 years before I won my first novice race. And And the thing was, I just enjoyed getting out in boats. One thing in my sporting or personal development was somewhere I missed all the bits about developing hand-eye coordination. So I was always hopeless at catching balls. And schoolboy sport in the 1970s was focused a lot around football and cricket and things where you had to catch balls. And so finding rowing was something you didn't have to do that. And it was just pleasant, as they talk about in Wind in the Willows, it's just quite pleasant getting out in the water and just messing around in boats. So it just became an attractive thing anyway. But then, of course, got into, at school, you get into training and different crews and competition, and we were pretty hopeless. And as I say, it took me 5 years to win my first race. And I'd forgotten about that until I went a few years ago to a school rowers reunion, and we had a coach in that year when we won that race, who had been recruited from the state crew as an assistant coach. It was his first attempt at coaching. He was deciding along the way that perhaps coaching wasn't his thing, and he said the turning point for him was after that race. I came up to him and said, this is the first race I've won in 5 years. And that's when he felt he could make a difference. And he actually became the first aid coach for the next 20 years after that, which I didn't know until I saw him decades later at this reunion. So sometimes you never know the influence you have, even in subtle ways, on other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we'll get further into that as well, because I'm sure that you have made a similar impact on other athletes too. But then, so competing as a lightweight rower, it does present unique challenges. So how did you manage the physical and mental aspects of this category?
Yeah, so lightweights, and the lightweight category for men, it's a maximum individual weight of 72.5 kilos. A crew can't average more than 70 kilos. In women, 59 kilos individual maximum and 57 kilo average. So, and I think the men's weights were taken off US GI statistics from the 1960s. There's a big database to find the average size of a person. So, it was 11 stone, 70 kilos. I'd been as a schoolboy, I was certainly heavier than lightweight. But when I started rowing university, that was actually where it was all happening. And you're sort of on the heavier side of what would normally be lightweight. But I did find that once I got down to lightweight, I was very competitive. And so that sort of became the rowing that I fell into. And that's where I was also able to team up with other top lightweights who were in the club at the time and start to develop my rowing career to a higher level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. And then moving forward to becoming the captain of the ANU Boat Club, how did that role influence your perspective on teamwork and mentorship?
Okay, well, I became captain in 1984, and I can't say I was a very good captain because that was at the time when I was then taking off, started got into trying to train for World Championships level. So I was training 11 times a week, so I was very absorbed in my own training program. So the captaincy kind of took a little bit of the back tier. So I can't say I was a very good captain. It was probably more post my rowing career that I then got involved with being a committee member, then president of the club, and started growing the club there. So, and it's been it's an on again, off again thing, because I was the president of the club in the early 1990s and was building it up, and we made it quite strong, and it was certainly very competitive at Australian University Championships. And then I was lucky enough to get the position as the head coach of the ACT Academy of Sport rowing program during the whole Sydney Olympic preparation period, the 6 years leading into Sydney. And that actually pulled me out of the club, and all the structures I'd set up unfortunately started getting pulled apart. And in fact the club reached a stage at one stage where it was really struggling before I got back involved again. So yes, it's I guess the club, and now I've been a member for 45 years, has been a sort of a central theme to my life, and an element of constancy to come back to. So I've it's been something I've had a strong interest in, just seeing it's a success.
Yeah, well, how did you contribute to the rejuvenation of the club when it was close to closing down?
Yeah, so I got to a stage in, and this was after I was still coaching at the ACT Academy of Sport, still coaching on national teams, and it got to a stage where it was mostly run by students, and not necessarily with the expertise in running a strong club in sport, and especially one that was very resource intensive, like rowing is, with expensive equipment, and with all the safety aspects you have of being in a hazardous environment on water and in Canberra in freezing conditions. So it was struggling, and in fact it got to the stage early 2007, I got a phone call that someone said they just heard on ABC Talkback Radio that someone had said the club was going to fold. And this was my old club. My wife Adrienne was, and it's the Australian National University Club. She was working at the Australian National University, and I'd also taught her to row. And so the two of us thought, all right, well, we'll get involved now and see if we can just prevent the whole thing being wound up, because it had reached an unsustainable stage of only having 26 financial members, no coach boats, a mostly trashed fleet of rowing boats. And so there was going to be a big task, but it was at that point that we just called a general meeting of the remaining members to start talking about getting the thing back on the feet. Fortunately, the timing was good because it was 2 weeks before orientation week, which is a big recruitment opportunity for the club. We had a working bee to repair some of the trashed and old boats, to actually just have some seats to put bums on. And then we had a recruiting drive at O Week, and we ended up with doubling our membership numbers to 50 something. And that gave us the beginnings of a club. ANU Sport, who's sort of our parent, the club's parent body, they were a bit over rowing at that stage because it had been sort of really struggling and a bit of a liability for them. So I approached their board, but they weren't very helpful and forthcoming. So then we had to start a bit of a media or profile campaign about it. So even just the tiniest little novice race that we won at a country regatta, I put out a broadcast email that ANU Boat Club wins again, and you start to build up a perception after a while that we're actually doing things and turning things around, and it's quite a different story these days, where we're one of the clubs, one of the university's better funded clubs. It's one of the strongest clubs, and yes, we're no longer seen, I think, as a liability.
Yes, and when you had made the transition, is that when there was still a connection between rowing ACT and rowing New South Wales? And then you worked towards making the separation between the two?
So yes, I was involved. So the ACT Rowing Association, that was formed when the lake was filled in 1964, Lake Burley Griffin, and at that time it was so tiny that it was basically affiliated as a country association within the bigger Rowing New South Wales. So over the years it started to grow to a size where it should be able to stand on its own 2 feet. So I was part of a 3-person working group in the early 90s that actually started to negotiate a separation. Going to meetings with Rowing New South Wales in Sydney, sometimes coming from tiny Canberra, it did often feel a bit like the Duchy of Grand Fenwick declaring war on the United States of America. But over time, they were a bit reluctant to let us go because they were enjoying the affiliation fees in their revenue. But there was a bit of a governance crisis for a short period in 1995, and that created the opportunity to actually complete the separation. So it happened later that year, and by 1996 we were just an independent state association. So yes, I was certainly involved in the early stages of those negotiations to put the framework in place.
Yeah, and so what impact did that have on rowing in the ACT, having that separation?
Yeah, well, it meant straight away were involved in one of the sort of premier events in Australia on the rowing calendar, the Interstate Regatta, has the Kings and Queens Cups and other boat classes involved in these interstate races. So it's just one crew from each state that actually represent their states, rather than the national championships, which is open to all clubs and all crews to field multiple entries in each event. So from 1996, we were able to field enter all those interstate races. So I was the head coach of the first ACT interstate team, and we entered crew in the King's Cup. And everybody, the other states thought this is a bit of a novelty, having the ACT entering, until the next year, when we medalled in I think half the events and actually won the King's Cup for men's eights, and that did kind of upset things, so that then they had a look at the rules to actually say, well, it's sort of a little bit out of the natural balance of things to have the ACT beating much bigger states in this event. But we have done well and won medals in that event since then.
There we go.
So anyway, that was a lot of considerable satisfaction. It was quite upsetting to those who were used to the ACT being out the back, to actually see it out the front. But certainly from other states, it made the front page of the Canberra Times, and the front and back page simultaneously. It was an exciting time.
Yeah, well, even speaking more about competing, so you were at the 1986 Edinburgh Commonwealth Games, which must have been pretty monumental. Can you share what the experience meant to you? Yeah,
it was... and look, there's an interesting story about that one, because, and again, you learn things all the way through. I was very keen to trial for the team for the 1986 Commonwealth Games. I went to the 1984 World Championships in Canada, but I'd had to put my degree on hold for that year, and it was going to be the last year of my degree. Put it on hold to be able to go and train interstate with the national crew, and then go to North America for the World Championships. And because back then you didn't have universities that were as sport friendly as they are now, where you're able to work these things in together and actually study and train simultaneously. My pair partner was able to mix it fairly well by having his girlfriend run off lecture tapes for him and mail them to him in Victoria, but I didn't have the luxury of that, and so I just took a year off. So I was determined to get the last year of my degree finished to leave myself free for the Commonwealth Games. So the next year, 1985, my partner and I were actually became the Australian Senior A Lightweight Pairs champions. So we were the number ones in the country, but I'd already made the decision that if the national crew wasn't going to be training in Canberra, so that I could continue study, then I'd just step out of the national team for that year to get my studies done. So I explained that to the national selectors. The crew was going to be training in Victoria, so I stepped out of the crew and trained and finished my degree. And it was, had a wonderful year of study, and it was great. Had some amazing research projects I was involved in, and so finished my degree on a high note. And then was successful again that next season for Commonwealth Games selection, but it was close. So the selectors got to picking 5 of us for a 4 to go to the Commonwealth Games. They said they couldn't split us, so they'd give us to the coach, and he could make the decision. The coach was the coach of the crew from the previous year's World Championships, which I pulled out of, and I was going to be one of the stronger members of the crew, and I was replaced with the 9th person for the 8th. And the crew just missed a medal at the 1985 World Championships by 0.8 of a second, I think. So I was a little bit worried that could influence things, and I did find it that it was I did find myself on the margins right to begin with. So I ended up the crew reserve, but the crew reserve for the Commonwealth Games is an official member of the team. So I went to the Commonwealth Games. I raced in the reserves race. It was my first Games experience. People talk about the excitement of the opening ceremony. I totally underestimated just how blown away I'd be walking into the stadium for the opening ceremony. It seemed to, this was in Edinburgh, and it seemed to be half Australian in the crowd at the opening ceremony. People were just going crazy, and it was amazing, just the excitement of walking in like that. And it's a special thing, I think, for athletes to get that opportunity to walk into a Games opening ceremony. And then just being on the athlete side of the Commonwealth Games, on the other side of the camera lens, and actually seeing what it's like behind the scenes, you can be quite different, often in good ways. Often it's still just like your regular event. You're not necessarily aware that you're standing on a stage with 1 billion people looking at you. You've got the boathouse, the boats, the water, the lake, the start line, the finish line. It's the same sort of thing, and then you see it presented on TV, and it's this thing that looks often quite different to actually how it felt.
Oh, that's amazing.
But it was great to be a part of that, and that was my first Games experience, and I've had a few since then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Where else?
Well, I've now been on 10 Australian Games teams, so 6 for the Paralympic Games, 2 Olympic teams, 1 Youth Olympic team, and in addition to that, Commonwealth Games team. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, then, looking into, that was as a coach and as a team lead, right?
Yeah, so I've been, so the Commonwealth Games in Edinburgh was my only time going as an athlete, and all the other Games experiences have been either as a coach or as like with an operations management team for the team.
Yeah. So what are some coaching moments that do stand out as particularly rewarding?
One that really sticks in my mind was at 3 o'clock in the morning on the 19th of July 2000, the first rower I'd ever talent ID'd, because I did a lot of talent identification as a coach, because in the ACT we didn't have a strong feeder system of rowers, and when I was head coach at ACTAS we did talent ID. Before I was at ACTAS, when I was at ANU, I was coaching at the club, and I found in the ANU gym there was this tall girl who was absolutely pulling a rowing ergometer apart, and I looked at her and I thought she should be in a boat. So I walked up to her and said, "Hello, I'm from the rowing club. Have you ever thought about coming down and going for a row?" Anyway, she signed up, so that was in 1989. Just kind of progressed very slowly, had a bit of a drift off to cycling for a while, came back to rowing, and then started really hitting her straps. She was one of our medalists at that 1987 interstate regatta in the women's single scull. She just came from nowhere and got the silver medal, and then realised, then she was well and truly national team material. So I got her onto the national team the next year, the year after that. And then Australia hadn't qualified several boats for the 2000 Olympics in Sydney. There was a last chance qualification opportunity in July 2000 in Lucerne in Switzerland. And Kerry the rower, she was selected for the women's quad scull to have a stab at qualifying for one of those last spots. There was one spot left, I think, one spot left, and they just missed that spot. But then an account back of to get under the quota, the Olympic IOC's quota for the Games, there were actually an extra 6 rowing seats available. So they went back to who missed out on qualifying the closest. Her quad did. So 3 o'clock the next morning, because they found out that evening, Swiss time, I'm lying in bed, I had the phone on, and it went off, and here was this rower screaming down on the phone at me that she'd just qualified for the Sydney Olympic Games. And I think, and this was, as I say, I was the first person I had ever TID'd, and then, and was coaching her from scratch, took her to her first few national championships and everything like that. So while I didn't coach her for that qualification, it was just something, a rower who I had coached who'd actually hit the highest level. And I was lucky enough to be standing in the finish tower during the Sydney Olympic Games, and saw her come down the track and finish 7th at the Olympics.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, it was. I still remember the moment when she called. Yeah.
And how did she fare in the Olympics?
Yeah, so seventh at the Olympics. Yeah, it was a crew that actually got better with every row. So the crew that had just originally edged them out of the Olympic Games, Olympic qualification, Romania, they finished ahead of Romania then at the Olympics. Just every time they went out, they actually got better. It was almost like the Olympics came a little bit too early for them, because maybe they would have been in the A final if it had been a week later. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, even then, having coached multiple national crews, can you share some particular memorable coaching experiences that tested your skills and what you learned from it?
Well, yeah, as I say, you learn with each experience. So I coached 10 national crews, and there are a lot of things you think you do differently in hindsight. Especially where you've just missed out. I seem to be quite good at coaching crews at coming fourth at World Championships, but did get some medals. And I guess perhaps I'm not sure how much things really tested me, but it was, as I say, you learn on each of those trips, especially from the people around you, but also from your athletes too. Things, like even just the internet sort of starting to become widespread. When I first started taking teams away, we'd have the deck of postcards. So, and all the rowers would have, part of their job is writing the postcards to mail back to supporters and family and everything like that. And then suddenly one year they all needed to get to an internet cafe, that was a whole new thing. That now they're sending emails back to supporters and friends at home, and so. And I hadn't anticipated that, and just everybody suddenly needed email access because smartphones didn't exist. You had to go to an internet cafe to find the internet to actually be able to send an email to someone, and that became a essential concern for athletes who had told their families they'd keep in touch while they were away. So there are various things you do learn, and you learn each time. And some of my best coaching education was just simply sitting having coffee and breakfast with other national coaches and actually picking their brains and stuff.
Yeah. Well, then what about you were transporting boat trailers across Europe, right? So any incidents from that experience or any particular memories?
I had one big adventure. So it was we had a World Junior Championships in Plovdiv in Bulgaria, and the boat trailer actually came from the Ghent boat rowing club in Belgium, and the boats had been leased from a German boat builder in not far from Heidelberg, and I needed to actually get those boats back and return the trailer as well. So I was the team member who'd put their hand up to say yes, I'll drive the trailer back. Now normally one of the shortest routes is through the former Yugoslav nations to get back. But the Kosovo War had only finished 6 weeks earlier, and cars with number plates from NATO countries probably weren't that welcome in going through countries like Serbia at the time, and also a lot of the bridges had been blown up. And so I had an interesting diversion, basically going from Plovdiv to Sofia, following the North Macedonian border down to Greece. Going from the Aegean coast up through the mountains and the Greek ski resorts to tying the trailer down to the Adriatic coast, and then a 27-hour ferry ride from Igoumenitsa in Greece to Venice, and then taking the trailer across northern Italy, where was able to pull over and have a coffee, watch a total eclipse in northern Italy, up through Switzerland, all the way up through Germany, drop the boats off, and then back through Luxembourg and Belgium. And I had all the time in the world because the regatta was finished. When the team manager got sent the reimbursement bills for that trip, he said I wasn't going to be driving the boat trailer the next year. It was, but it was a great trip.
No regrets.
Yes, I never regret actually having put my hand up to tow the boats home after that championships, because it was a wonderful adventure.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, I saw Europe.
Yes, and in addition to that, though, taking these young men who are competing on, some of them, many would have been their first overseas trips, which must have been truly rewarding. So how did you prepare them for the international competitions and the cultural experiences that would come with it?
Yeah, it's, I mean, I would always make up a packing list for them, because someone would forget something. So they'd have a checklist of, as an athlete, what you need to pack, more than just your racing suit and your toothbrush, although they are very important. But also to make the most of the cultural experience for them. So we would mix in days off where we would do different things. Sometimes they would pick the things that we do, and sometimes I'd ask around locals, so, you know, what on just half days or days off from training, when we could go and explore. That did take me down some interesting roads sometimes that I probably wouldn't have chosen to drive on had I known in advance, given the narrow width of some European and mountain roads. But it was a great adventure. But I guess that's one of the things in having young athletes, especially taking junior athletes. You know, you are in loco parentis. You know, you do have an influence on them and part of their development. You do always have to. You've got to be conscious of that, and you know, part of it is setting high ethical standards for what you do as an example, and to also hold them to strong standards when they're overseas. All of us are actually representing Australia, and so you have to be additionally conscious of that, and everything you do is perceived in some way, and especially, you know, young people together in a group, you sometimes get the pack thinking, and they might think of a bit of mischief, not thinking it would be of any concern, and so you need to be there to remind them that actually we're ambassadors for our country at the moment, and the sport in our country as well, and people watch and actually read and interpret everything that we do.
Well, you mentioned having that coffee and chats with other coaches and other umpires and whatnot. Is there camaraderie amongst various teams, both for the competitors themselves, but also amongst you as coaches, and that goodwill to compare notes and be collaborative?
Definitely. And that's one of the things I did like about Australian rowing teams, was great collaboration amongst the coaches on those teams. You know, a great sharing of ideas and knowledge. My first national team as a coach was in 1990 for the World Championships. So I'd only been coaching for 2 years, and everything actually ran to plan. And all of a sudden I found myself a coach on the World Championships team. I had the benefit of having been a World Championships athlete, so I knew kind of the way things ran at international events. But in a coaching role, you know, it's you do see things and have to operate through a different lens. We actually had a good national head coach that year. Interestingly, he was the former East German head coach. The wall had come down only a year or so earlier, and Australia had snaffled him to come out and be the coach for the Australian national team. So he was actually my mentor coach for 6 months. Someone who'd actually coached the world's most successful rowing nation for a couple of decades. So I learnt a lot from him. He didn't tell me anything about the drugs, fortunately. So, but all the other stuff they were doing in East Germany on training physiology and biomechanics, shared a lot of that information. But a lot about he was very good at knitting together the team collaboration amongst the coaches, and really pushed people to share ideas, provide feedback to each other, and use each other as a sounding board. I don't know if that had happened much before him, because I wasn't on teams before that, but after that point, it was something I noticed in the teams I was coached on after that, that there really was a good culture of collaboration between the coaches. And I think, you know, that's the strength of a team. If you've got the strongest team of support and coaching working together on the bank for you, that becomes a competitive advantage for the athletes.
Yeah. So who else is part of that support team? So there's the coach, there's the reserves?
Yeah, coach, reserves, but also, you know, you have doctor, physiotherapist, you know, and all these specialised roles. You've got to be, you know, a multi-task or multi-role person when you're on a travelling team. So the doctor's got to be prepared to drive the bus. The physio's got to be prepared to help get the boats off the trailer. Everybody has to be prepared to roll up their sleeves and actually pitch in and work together. And so generally when you're the leader of those teams, they're the people you're looking for to be on are the multitaskers who have no qualms about being asked to do other jobs, because that's what you have to do when you're away from your usual support and resources in a foreign country. You have to be able to work together. And you see that I've seen it actually work really well with even just more recently through Olympic and Paralympic teams had contact with Australian embassies overseas, and I've noticed some embassy staff that might be quite siloed in their normal jobs back in Australia, coming from different departments like agriculture and foreign affairs and things, that when they're all together overseas in the Australian embassy, I noticed often actually work really well collaboratively, and are great to work with as a team.
Yes, yeah. I love that cross collaboration. Brings a stronger team, stronger competitors, better results.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, because none of us know everything, and you should never stop learning, because the world is continually progressing. Each sport is continually progressing in what they do, and so you do need to have a learning mindset and a collaborative mindset. And so when you've got experts around you, it's a great opportunity to actually get feedback on what you do. That, and also it's good for coaches to actually get the feedback from their athletes. And when you've got national or international level athletes, they do know a thing or two, sometimes it's a brave thing for some coaches to actually seek frank feedback from their athletes, but it's something that I did every year. As part of the athletes review, I'd actually also get the athletes to review me and provide feedback to me too as a coach, because that was also part of my learning, is to actually see it through their eyes.
Wow, and especially when many of them would be quite your junior, right? And to get
Definitely.
that feedback?
Yes, definitely. But often by that stage you've got a relationship where, and look, it's a thing you're while you're a little bit arm's length because you are an adult, a leader, you have to be objective. Sometimes you have to tell them what to do, and so you have to have that slightly arm's length relationship. If you've developed it in a collaborative way, then you've got the trust of them and the confidence for them to be able to share that information.
And know that you will make good use of it. Yeah,
and you create an environment for them, because, and it's, I remember General Peter Cosgrove, before he became Governor General. I was at a workshop with a group of head coaches from different sports that he was at, and he was talking about his time when he was a young graduate from Duntroon, and then very quickly, shortly after, thrown into being the leader of a group of highly experienced soldiers in a combat area in Vietnam. And they all more experienced than he was, but he was actually the leader. And he said one of the key things to effective leadership for their survival was to actually be able to maintain that still an arm's length relationship, but to have the trust, set up the trust environment and collaboration to be able to draw the best of the knowledge out of that group of people he had with him, who he was in command of, and not just, I'm the leader, I have to tell you what to do. They knew a lot, and so you need to be able to draw that information, and in that case it can be a life and death survival situation, actually being able to tap into that information.
Yeah, that's incredible. And then life and death, or win or lose.
Yes, or win or lose. And so I think it's a mark of a good coach is to draw on the strengths of everybody around you, including your athletes.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And then always learning, continuous learning, you then have moved to be an umpire as well.
Yeah.
And so what brought on the change for being the boat race official, and how has this role influenced your perspective of the sport?
Yep. So I started umpiring. So I was coaching early 90s, and this is when the rowing ACT was still part of New South Wales. We had, it picked up a new head coach in 1991. Because the ACT was part of New South Wales, I was sort of one of New South Wales sort of, I guess, more active senior coaches, even though I was in Canberra. I was asked by Rowing New South Wales to help introduce that new head coach around to the clubs. Anyway, while I was travelling around with him, introducing him around Sydney and Canberra, I was talking to him about events and talked him into putting a long distance race that we have each spring in Canberra called the Cold Mountain Marathon, putting it on the New South Wales state team selection criteria to actually boost the event. And he did, and he brought a whole, so everybody from trailers from all over New South Wales came down and entered this race. And it was so badly run, it was a complete disaster. And they lost track of, who was who in the race and everything. And this head coach said, "That's it, I'm never coming back again." And he never did. Anyway, I thought, well, rather than complain about how badly this was run, I don't think I can do that without being prepared to roll my sleeves up and help. So I started helping with umpiring at just a local level in the ACT while I was coaching. So regattas, I'd have a dual role. I'd be in the umpire's boat, but also coaching. So I developed an interest in that side of the sport. So I thought one day it might be something I might do a bit more of. And then 2003, I got a sort of a senior role with the Australian Institute of Sport, working because I was then gravitated to the sport management side of things, and it was such a high volume workload job that I wasn't going to be able to do justice to the level of national team coaching I was doing at that time. So I stepped back from the coaching, and it's funny, when you step back from one bit you get sucked up into other bits of the sport. So I started, Rowing Australia talked to me about ramping up my umpiring a bit more. There was a push then to find more younger umpires to umpire at international level, because World Rowing had just introduced an age cap on international umpires, and then having introduced that age cap, 50% of international umpires were going to hit that age cap in the next decade. So there was an international push for new umpires, and it just coincided with me looking to actually step a little bit more into the umpiring space. So Rowing Australia were really supportive of me. They fast-tracked my development as a national umpire. So I passed my national umpire's licence in 2005 as one of the first two ACT umpires to actually qualify as a national umpire. And then by 2009 I passed my international exams and was an international umpire then. And that just opened up. And so they just kept building, and I developed that interest in it. I still kept coaching at club level, and because good umpires, it's good if they're experienced in the coaching side and moving boats around and athletes. So so I got into umpiring then, and that actually developed a lot further beyond that too once I started the international umpiring thing.
Yes, well, it has taken many places like Namibia, and recently you were in China.
Yes, I was in China last week. So how that happened was when as I was leading into sitting my international exams in 2005, I did some education with World Rowing in New Zealand in 2008, and at the end of one of the day's sessions, one of the senior New Zealand board members was stood up and said, "Look, for all the New Zealanders in the room, don't forget we've got the Prime Minister's Foundation, which can be used for developing excellence in officiating, and we encourage you to tap into this, and we'll assist you to actually develop your skills further." And I thought, we should be doing this in Australia. Came back to Australia and actually found out that it was happening to a degree in the building across the road from me at the Institute of Sport. So there was a national officiating scholarship program. Rowing had never been involved in it, and so spoke to World Rowing and said, I think we should do this to actually develop a new generation of international rowing umpires. We spoke to the Australian Sports Commission. They thought it was going to be a bit of a novelty having rowing coaches coming in, because really the thing was geared all around professional football codes and Netball Australia and those sort of things. But we came in, and anyway, so I was the initial mentor for the first two rowing scholarship holders in that program in 2010, and worked with them to prepare them for the international exams. I sat those exams at the end of 2010 and got the highest marks of the candidates in that exam in China. So off the back of that, rowing was no longer a novelty for this thing. It was actually then one of the star sports. So the next year we got another 2 scholarship places for rowing, and those 2 candidates, they also topped the exams at the end of 2011, the international exams. The next year we got another scholarship. The year after that, another 2. Again, it was the same thing. They were topping the exam. So then World Rowing was saying what's going on in Australia, because they seem to be doing very well in the international umpiring exams, which now that I'm an examiner, I can tell you they are tough exams. And so that kind of led back to this scholarship program, which I was mentoring each year, the sole mentor, and driving the relationship with the Sports Commission for the program. A vacancy was coming up on World Rowing's umpiring commission. They'd never had someone from the Oceania region on it before. It's very European dominated, and I was speaking to the World Rowing's Oceania council member and suggested a couple of candidates from Australia to put forward for that. He agreed. I approached Rowing Australia to nominate one of these candidates, and their board came back and said they'd like to nominate me, which I was surprised, but then I thought, I'll have a go at this. So anyway, that went up, and I had an interview with the chair of that commission from Belgium, who was in Australia for a short period, and I was appointed by World Rowing's Council in the end of 2014 and started on the 1st of January 2015. That opened up a whole new world of opportunities. Because of my career background of working in sport, it also gave me a lot of skills and experience in working in sport development. World Rowing has a development branch to grow the sport and help grow the strength of developing nations, but also introduce new nations to the sport. And over time, while I'm doing all my gigs of now going and mentoring coaches at World Rowing events, including the Olympic and Paralympic Games, they started drawing me into some of their development stuff. So yes, that's included development work in countries like Namibia, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Vanuatu, China last week, and it's been totally fascinating. It's been a really enjoyable experience actually doing that, because you do feel, whereas at a lot of the regattas I go to, I'm mentoring a lot of the people who are kind of the best in the world. Now you're actually working at grassroots level. In Namibia we had our rowing workshop set up just outside a township, so we had a day when all the kids from the township came down and jumped into boats, and it was just fantastic seeing this and just the whole experience of it. And and helping that country who had some fairly cluey people how to set themselves up, how to make their own copies of the good boat molds, so they can make them out of fiberglass themselves in that country, and actually just have a fleet of boats they could actually trash and just hack about in, and doing things like that. And I found it just a really fascinating part of the sport, and really very, very enjoyable, the whole thing.
And probably that is more than what you thought you would be getting into to become an umpire, right?
Definitely. I didn't know what I was... Oh, yeah, no, that's right. When I started umpiring, that wasn't the thing. The thing was just to try and run better events, make it better for athletes, a better athlete experience. No longer have the embarrassment of running bad events. But over time, I did come up with some philosophies too. I did, as a coach, my athletes were on the receiving end, or I saw athletes on the receiving end of poor umpiring decisions, sometimes poor umpiring attitudes, where some people would go in and shout or direct athletes. So the gig with World Rowing also did give me, part of it is that I'm part of a team that delivers World Rowing's umpire education, and so I did take on a mission to try and create more empathetic umpires who really would geared things much more towards the athlete's interests. So while the rule book says the most important things for an umpire at a regatta, safety first and fairness second, I just put it in all my presentations that there's a third thing, and that's to facilitate an environment where athletes can perform at their best. And that's not screaming and shouting and creating tension and things like that. If people do the wrong thing, yes, you talk to them. If there's safety, you have to, often a safety risk, you have to be direct. But there are ways of doing that, and whether that started flowing through or not, I did notice by 2017 I was at the World Junior Championships in Lithuania, and for the first time I just noticed it was quiet on the departure pontoon, with just the umpires having quiet chats with the coaches or the athletes, even though some athletes had some things wrong, like they wouldn't have the proper national team colours painted on their oars. The others just have a quiet chat and say, look, we'll just make a note, can you fix it for the next round? Not scream at them and say this is wrong, you can't go to the start. It's to facilitate an environment in which athletes can perform at their best. I like to think that's actually flowing through, and that in making decisions, especially hairline decisions, you make them in the athlete's interest. You see things, are you making a decision in the athlete's interest, and it shouldn't be because you're a big important umpire. Put your ego to one side, and it should be to officiate first and foremost in the interests of the athlete.
Well, have you had to face the brunt of any strong disagreements to any decision made as an umpire?
Well, as a coach, yes, I did. Look, I'm not necessarily a confrontational person, but I did have athletes, just impacted by poor decisions sometimes. But I don't think I've really had to bear the brunt of it. I've sometimes had to manage situations where other umpires have made poor decisions at critical moments, or not had the skills to actually make decisions. And sometimes it's like that on international juries when we have a spread of nationalities actually represented on that jury, that sometimes not everybody comes from a background of strength and knowledge and help make good decisions. And that's part of what I do in the background, is actually be there too as a backup for some of those from some nations that are still, perhaps don't have the same exposure to international events to develop that expertise.
Well, amongst all of this,
Yeah.
a lot of your work would be volunteering, right?
Yes.
Yes. So it does require a lot of dedication. So what does drive your commitment, especially during challenging times?
Well, I think behind, the coaching I've done, but also I guess the officiating and umpiring side of it and team management side is I've got a lot out of this sport myself, and I want others to actually get out of it what I got out of it, and to help create that system. So even just at club level, I got a lot out of the club that we're sitting here chatting in now, and I want others to have that opportunity to get the same opportunity. I came to ANU, I moved from Adelaide to Canberra to go to ANU to get a good education. I joined an ANU sport club and I got to see the world. And in fact it led me indirectly to my career and what I do. So I've actually got so much out of joining this club and the sport. I'd like to be able to help others to do the same things. And sometimes you can only do that to limited effect, but at least I want to try. And I think that's a motivation behind what I do. I want to, even just working with people like kids in developing countries, who'd never had exposure to rowing before, to see kids from this Namibian township come down and jump into boats. They've never seen it before, and for them to have an opportunity to actually have that sporting experience and find out something about them and be able to help them to do that. I've actually found the volunteering side of working in a sport way more rewarding than what it was actually being a national team athlete competing at the World Championships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Well, how have you seen rowing evolve? So you get to be part of these grassroots opportunities, but that's a little bit different to seeing the sport actually evolve both in Australia and globally.
Yeah. Yes. Well, when I started rowing, it was, and in fact, when I joined the university club, it was wooden boats and wooden oars. Everything was very heavy, and now they're all sort of highly technical, carbon fibre and composite materials, and super light and super strong, and everything goes faster. Even just training methodologies, they were pretty unsophisticated in Australia. We did learn a lot over time. There are people who, all the way through your life, there are people who influence you. It was just serendipity that when my partner Merrick and I decided we'd have a crack at training for World Championships. We had at ANU a PhD student who'd been on the Swiss Olympic team in the Moscow Games 3 years earlier, and he was a meticulous planner, preparer, very Swiss in just his thinking and methodology, and developed this amazing program, and came from, he'd been an Olympic finalist himself, brought that knowledge, and it was just serendipity that we happened to be in the same town and same university as him at the same time, and he was interested in taking on a couple of people to coach to a top level. And Roland, our coach, was he was a key part of our success in getting to international level. But he brought sort of more advanced training methodologies than what we had in most of Australian rowing at the time, and that helped us. People were doing a lot more interval training rather than endurance training, and weren't getting that endurance base that they needed. We did a lot of distance and endurance training as well as the interval training to top it up. But it just put us in a better physiological state than a lot of our competitors, and you could feel it when you're racing. When you got out into elite, you knew you were actually managing this race better than your competitors. And it gave you great confidence going to the start line, actually knowing you'd probably rode further and trained harder than everybody else you're racing.
And got moving from the heavier boat to the lighter boat as well. Yes,
moving heavier boats to lighter boats. Yes, we're also kind of at the vanguard of importing more lighter and sophisticated boats using modern materials. So again, we were using perhaps better boats than most of our competitors too. A turning point in Australia was hosting the World Championships in 1990 because there was an opportunity for Australian boat builders to have a lot of their boats used rather than brought from overseas. But there was a big catch-up then for them to actually get across the technological changes that have been happening with boat builders in Europe. And by 1990, Australia was producing some of the best and fastest composite boats in the world. And then we had an Australian-made boat win a gold medal at the 1992 Olympics in the men's double scull. And they'd really made their mark by that stage. And so now we do have world-class boats made in Australia. They're internationally competitive, but it's kind of, I've seen that transition since I joined the club and started with wooden oars and boats.
Yeah. Well, then even moving from freshwater over to saltwater, you have been involved in introducing coastal rowing and beach sprints. Yep. So what potential do these formats have in expanding the sport's appeal, and how do they differ from traditional rowing?
Yes. So coastal rowing is a thing that's been developing perhaps over the last 20 years outside of Australia. In Australia, our coastal version is actually surf boats with surf lifesaving. So there's been a regular transition of flat water rowers across to surf boats, often at the end of their careers. National team members might see that as just a fun opportunity to keep rowing. So this coastal rowing, which does use more open water boats that are self-bailing, they're wider and more stable, but ergonomically they're similar to flat water boats to row, feel exactly the same. It had been growing, and then so that was endurance coastal over 6 or 8 kilometre races, but then a more exciting version started popping up just in the last decade called beach sprints. And so I was using the coastal boats, but it was just simply runners sprinting down a beach into the boat, row out the slalom course 250 metres, straight back 250 metres, and then sprint back up the beach and throw themselves across the finish line. And it's match racing. And we'd never done it in Australia. I got appointed to the jury for the first World Beach Sprint Championships in 2019 in Shenzhen in China. And I went and I saw this, and I just noticed how the Chinese on the beach who knew nothing about rowing just got drawn into the excitement of match racing, seeing China versus Spain, and a US versus Iran and things like this, going up and down on this course. And I thought, there's something in this. This is actually a little more exciting than your traditional rowing regatta, where you spend quite a few minutes waiting for the boats just to quickly go past you. You can see the whole event, and you get it. It's one-on-one, and it's exciting watching people throw themselves, through the air at the finish line to, as they run up the beach. And at the time, that coincided with the International Olympic Committee telling World Rowing that the lightweight events, there were 3 lightweight events in the Olympic Games for lightweight rowing, that the IOC was going to drop lightweight events in all sports except the combat sports and weightlifting. And so it put rowing on notice that the clock's ticking. There's going to be a time when they're going to drop those things. World Rowing did go on a campaign of trying to justify and doing a lot of research, and with its member federations, was trying to push for the retention of lightweight rowing. And then in 2018, Thomas Bach, from the president of the IOC, flew into the World Championships, called an impromptu meeting, and he said, forget all this campaign about things. The IOC had already made this decision. Lightweight rowing's gone. You need to have a think about if there are alternatives. Rowing didn't want to lose those medals and wanted to keep them in there, and the beach sprint thing was emerging. They weren't sure whether endurance or coastal, or endurance coastal or beach sprint would be the thing to suggest to the IOC. But just seeing how the attraction of the beach sprint and the excitement of it, and it kind of fitted in with trends in IOC new sports at the Olympic Games, where they're short, sharp and exciting, and the idea of match racing fits really well, that it became something that World Rowing then put up to replace the lightweight medals, was to have men's and women's solos and mixed double scull in the beach sprint events. And the IOC at its last Congress approved that for the 2028 Games. So now it's in there, and some other, and I guess in case this happened, and because I sort of became an early fan of it, but not many people knew much about it, I did want to then be an early expert in it, and so started studying it, trying to get into the events in different countries, just to develop my knowledge of beach sprints, do courses in it. So now I'm one of World Rowing's educators in technical delegate education. Technical delegates are the people who set up the whole structure and infrastructure of a regatta, and in educating people in the umpiring. I mean, there's no better way to learn it than to be an educator. So that's where I am, and that's where I was in China last week, because China, now that it's in the Olympic Games, they've also introduced it to the China National Games, which is the biggest event for the Chinese outside of the Olympic Games. And so now there's big investment in provincial teams in China into beach sprint rowing. They've had a strong transition of rowers from flat water across to beach sprints, and this education I was doing last week, it overlapped with one of their national series events, and from what I saw, a lot of their provincial beach sprint teams are stronger than most countries' national teams. So I'd watch out with China, because they're already well down the track. We're trying to produce the world's best athletes in beach sprint. Part of what I was there for is they now want to run the world's best events, which means having the world's best technical delegates and the world's best umpires there. And yeah, I think it's why we had 31 students last week, and we're going from classroom down onto the beach to look at the event running, so we can actually critique things that are happening in the event, and I think they're going to be pretty strong for the next few years. I'd be watching China.
Okay.
Yeah.
And see if it expands and develops in Australia as well.
Yes, so Australia's been a little bit slower to move. They've got such a heavy tradition and investment in the flat water rowing, but they do understand that there are now 3 Olympic medals in beach sprints. So there's beach sprints happening. Australia will have a national team this year for the World Championships. The selection trials are next month, so I've going to help run those, but use it as an education opportunity for Australian officials as well in running these events. One of the challenges for Australia has been the equipment side, because a lot of boat sheds around the country that do rowing are they're kind of at their capacity of storage, and these are bigger boats. You've got to find space to store them. So that's one of the challenges in Australia, and there's only a certain amount of waterfront real estate in Australia, especially near urban areas, often very expensive, where you can actually build new facilities to provide boat sheds. So that's been one of the sort of limiting factors in building the sport in Australia, but it is happening. There are pockets around the country. We have national championships and national selection events. We'll have national team. But yeah, it just opened my eyes seeing how far ahead the Chinese are now, and I know some other countries are doing the same thing. Yeah.
You're always keen to learn.
Yeah.
And so while I offer you another cup of tea, would you care for another one?
I'm good.
You fine?
Thank you. Yes, I'm still
and
going.
then we're going to move off the water.
Okay.
And so beyond rowing, you've been involved with Equestrian Australia, notably as team leader 2024 for the Australian Paralympic Equestrian team.
Yes.
So how did you develop an interest in equestrian sports, and how were you able to transfer your role at the AIS for rowing talent to equestrian talent?
Yeah, so it's I guess if I'd sat back 20 years ago, I wouldn't have seen this coming, because equestrian isn't my sport. I did marry an equestrian rider, but I really all I learnt through that marriage was which end of the horse bites and which end kicks, and how to feed carrots. So not a lot about horses, but when I was at the Australian Institute of Sport, I was in a role where I was actually working with sports in their high performance structure, leadership, governance, how they utilise things like the National Institute network in Australia to assist performance outcomes in their sport. So, and I worked through over 16 years at the Australian Institute of Sport. I worked with 19 national sporting bodies on their national high performance programs. The AIS, it had been going through a lot of restructuring basically since after the London Games in 2012. That restructuring visited the area I was working in 2019. I and a few of us were given the option of redeployment or redundancy, because these roles were actually going to be shifting. And after quite a few years service, the redundancy was looking pretty good. So I decided to back myself and grab the money and ran and set up my own consultancy. I was out of work for 2 days and the phone rang. The Australian Olympic Committee offered me a 7-month contract straight up to work on the Winter Youth Olympic Games for them. And that just got me rolling, and 6 years later I still haven't done a web page or printed business cards, because I've just had a continuation of sort of clients and opportunities, and a lot of that came from the networks I had at the AIS. One of the sports that I picked up after the Rio Games, or just prior to Rio, was equestrian. So the Australian Institute of Sport was supporting them in 3-day eventing on the Olympic side and para dressage on the Paralympic side. So I started working with them and their high performance director and learning about the sport. And equestrian has, like many sports, has a strong history of promoting from within. It would promote horse experts, but not all of them were actually experts in what's been a rapidly developing system of national high performance management and structure and things like the National Institute network. So anyway, when I branched out on my own, equestrian, I developed that relationship with them. They were a repeat client. I did a few projects for them, and then they called me after the Tokyo Games in 2021 and asked if I'd come in full time to work on para equestrian as the national lead, because there wasn't like a strong structure for the sport, or a clear structure for the sport in Australia, and they did want to try and boost the sort of high performance leadership around the team for the whole Paris campaign as well on the high performance end. So I came in. I was one of only 2 people working with Equestrian Australia in full time in the para space. There was a while there when it was just me, and I had to learn very quickly about equestrian and the things to do with that. What helped me was my whole time at the Australian Institute of Sport, I worked with para sport and the Paralympics, and I had an interest in it, kind of going back years, and it was just again it fell out really well when I started at the AIS in 2003. They wanted someone to look after para sport, and so I included that in my portfolio to begin with. So along the way I learned a lot about classification, which is a key part of para sport, which determines your eligibility to compete in para sport, how that works, how's the administration of it, the need for it, and the rationale behind it, and developed a strong relationship with the Paralympic Committee. They started taking me to Paralympic Games. I went away as manager of their World Cup ski team to the World Cup in early 2008, and again that was just right place, right time. They didn't have a manager, and I went. And off the back of that, they offered me a chance to go to Beijing as part of their operations team for the Beijing Paralympic Games. And that kind of got me through the door with the whole games thing, because then they invited me to go to Vancouver 2010, London 2012. London 2012 I actually went as a coach for rowing in the first week, and coached the Australian double scull at the Paralympic Games. And in the second week after rowing had finished, I then joined the operations part of the team to work in their freight and logistics area. Did the same, and then in Rio was working in their freight and logistics, and did the same as their transport manager for both Olympic and Paralympic teams for Tokyo, and then worked in the operations area again with the Paralympic team I went as team leader to Paris with Equestrian. So I had that strong background. So anyway, Equestrian called me up after 2021, and I came in and to start trying to work to set up a stronger structure. I did have the advantage of actually having come from the Australian Institute of Sport and the Australian Sports Commission's grants committees I often sat on, so I understood how grants systems worked. Para dressage had been on just a flat level of funding for many, many years, and so set about actually and it wasn't enough to actually properly field a Paralympic team. So it meant we had teams that having to go off and spend a lot of their time outside of training actually just simply fundraising to get to the games, which did impact on their training and preparation. And it tended to make it more of a rich person's sport, which it still struggles with that, but teams weren't fully funded for the games. So set about putting cases, setting out plans how we were going to actually build this sport in Australia and presenting it to the Australian Sports, because I understood how it worked at the Australian Sports Commission and the AIS, and built up their funding. So now in just the space of the 3 years I've been working with para dressage, we've taken their funding from what had been a flat $675,000 a year now to $1.54 million a year, which enables them to actually properly prepare and actually fund national teams for World Championships and Paralympic Games. It does put the pressure back on the sport to actually produce with that funding, because there's an accountability that comes with it, but at least now they've got the wherewithal to be able to get on with it.
Yeah. So do you do the talent spotting for potential athletes in para equestrian as well?
No. We've created pathways. Para equestrian does have the benefit of having multiple entry points into the sport, unlike a lot of other para sports, because there are actually several organisations around Australia involved with putting people with disabilities onto horseback. So Riding for the Disabled Australia, but even pony clubs, some of the regular clubs and riding schools are doing this. There's a great national group called Equine Pathways Australia that's focused just on the para side, and actually part of a pathway opportunity for para athletes to take them from Riding for the Disabled Australia. So so I've actually seen, so it wasn't kind of break all those down and rebuild them. It was how do we actually use those things to actually bring their own resources to introducing people to para equestrian and be able to join them all together to help them work as part of a network. So there was only limited hours in my day, and I was managing a Paris campaign, So again, part of my submission to the AIS was to get support and funding to be able to engage pathways supervisors. So we now have a pathways manager to help with that stuff out there in knitting together this network of organisations, because it was happening at an informal level, but it wasn't clear for athletes coming into the sport how you actually progress. If you started with writing for the Disabled Australia, how do you get to the Paralympic Games? There was no clear picture or pathway about where's the next step as you start to progress. And so working just to help create a clearer pathway model and a more simplified one, using all these, there's this sort of complexity of different groups that are involved in it. Yeah.
So having strengthened the pathways for this, and then the funds as well, do you have any other future aspirations for para-equestrian?
The medals. It is, look, it's and look, when I came in, you're perceived as basically an outsider invading someone else's sport, and try to change things and bring them on a journey of change when they've been often quite habitualised to the way things have always happened, and and there's often this tradition behind many of those things. I think so while I've been working to change that, you certainly have those brickbats thrown at you for a long time, but then after I'd been doing it for 2 years, we then had the 2023 Australian Championships, and it was the biggest para-equestrian event in Australian history. And that's when all of a sudden everybody stopped throwing the brickbats, and everybody realised things are actually happening here. With where have all these riders come from? It was merged, it was combined, both the Olympic and Paralympic national championship combined together into one nationals. And I heard groans and complaints from the Olympic side that there are too many para athletes turning up in their national championships, which was just music to my ears. And it was like, watch out, because this is growing further. And a key part of that was classification, which is meant to be a facilitator to engagement in parasport. In equestrian, it was a bit of a bottleneck, and so it was actually to open that up and actually create more opportunities. So by 2023, had national classification opportunities in every Australian state happening. So whereas before, particularly during COVID, it had been hard for athletes to access that. And so just simply try enabling more opportunities, more doorways for people to come into the sport is just grown. But it's flowed through now to international registrations. Is from pre-COVID through to now, para-equestrian is the Equestrian Australian's discipline that has had the highest growth in international registrations of athletes, so more athletes competing internationally than any other discipline in equestrian. So including able-bodied dressage, it's much higher. And that's kind of because we've put a lot of things in place to build the sport.
Yeah. And I'm sure Adrian would have been pleased with your further development in the horse scene.
Well, again, I was sort of invading Adrian's space a little bit, because she'd been the expert in the house on equestrian things. So managed that very carefully, but it's given me a greater understanding of a sport that she loves.
That's amazing. Well, you taught her to row. She has taught you to ride?
I have been on horseback. I can't say I'm an expert on horseback. It's best out of the public eye. So yes, I have learned a lot about horses and their behaviour, and I did do a little, education course when I came on board with Equestrian Australia, just to learn some basics about horses and where to stand and where not to stand, and and everything like that.
Well, another hidden talent, you may not have progressed with your horsemanship, but what about the bagpipes? Let's talk bagpipes.
Okay.
Scottish heritage,
yes. All right. Do have Scottish. So my 16 great-great-grandparents, half of them were Scottish. But it was more Scotch College was not far from where we lived in Adelaide. My father had gone there, and so my brother and I went there too. And they had when I was in their junior school, they'd had a cadet corps, and they had a pipe band with it. Anyway, during the the sort of, I guess you probably coincided with the Whitlam years when cadets was scaled back in a lot of schools. The school actually wound up its cadet corps, but they did retain all the pipe band equipment and just packed it away in a room under a staircase. By the time I was in Year 9, where they had a maintenance staff member who was actually also the pipe major of the Adelaide University Regiment, which was the Army Reserve Regiment in South Australia. He was Scottish and like one of the best pipers in Australia, he and some students discovered this equipment under the staircase, and so he just started teaching the chanter to a few students, but they were some of my friends in my class. I sort of became interested in it, so I'd like to tag along with this as well. I actually started drumming first, so I was a tenor drummer, doing twiddling the pom-pom drumsticks, but I did ask to start learning the chanter too, and I think because I'd played the recorder and the flute and just had a background in playing those instruments, I picked it up really quickly, and by the time I was in Year 11, I was the pipe major of the school pipe band, and it grew then. It was still using this old cadet equipment, like I think the kilts were a 1950s Australian Army issue. The same with a lot of the other stuff. We didn't have proper stuff to wear. But anyway, we were at the beginning of this thing. The headmaster at the time saw it as a point of difference for the school to actually be the ones blasting out everybody else at sporting events with their school pipe band. It restarted after having shut down completely with the wind up of the cadets. We just started it not as a cadet thing, but just as a band of musicians, as a pipe band. And it was pretty ramshackle. We did have an excellent instructor who was a brilliant piper who could teach us how to do it. But by the time I became pipe major, that opened some interesting doors too, because often people would want to engage a piper. They'd ring, where do you get a piper? Oh, ring Scotch College. Scotch College, all right, who? Well, the pipe major. Well, he can do it. So I was very neutral in my piping. So I did pipe for the leaders of every major political party in Australia. I got to pipe acting Prime Minister Doug Anthony into a state conference of the National Country Party, but I did everybody else. So as I say, it was very fair and neutral. Had several engagements with Government House in Adelaide, which actually started with the Governor's ADC getting me in at 5 o'clock one morning as a surprise thing for the Governor's birthday to play Happy Birthday on the Bagpipes underneath his bedroom window. Yes, unfortunately the Governor had chosen to sleep in that morning, so he kind of stumbled out in his dressing gown and slippers to see what was going on below the windowsill. But it opened some interesting doors to do things, and dinner parties and things like that, where people wanted pipers, a lot of weddings, and so it was, it sort of became an interesting thing. But I actually enjoyed playing the pipes. I mean, they're noisy things, but I enjoyed the music. I enjoyed listening to it. Once you understand the music and the grace notes that go into it and everything like that, you start to listen for good pipe music. Yes, but it became one of those things when I became, a uni student. I still had my pipes, but it started diminishing. I piped for a few times at uni. Again, there'd be surprise things going into uni dinners and stuff like that, where I just unannounced come in with the pipes. A few people I've done a few weddings and things like that since then. But yes, it's they're a little bit rusty now, and also I've got a dilemma that I have these beautiful old antique pipes, which include traditional old natural material reeds in them, whereas these days all the bagpipes use synthetic bags and synthetic reeds and everything like that. So to actually get them up to a decent standard today, because they're pretty leaky now, I'll have to go to synthetic materials, and so I'm in two minds about that, because I do have this beautiful antique instrument. Yeah.
Are there people that can look after the more traditional instruments?
There would be. just locally. All the conversations with the people who do it just locally here. Yes, they're all using the new materials of synthetic reeds and bags. Everything.
And electrifying them as well?
Yes, and electrifying them. Yes, that's right.
Well, even speaking of Governor-Generals,
Yep.
you recently received the Order of the Australia Medal, which is a significant honour. Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah.
What does this recognition mean to you personally, and how does it reflect your journey being so devoted to the sport?
Yeah, well, it was very unexpected because it's kind of not something I set out to kind of go for. This thing just turned up in the mail, and I felt very humbled that anybody had actually bothered to take the time to submit a nomination, because I've done them for others. Yeah, I've put together nominations and been a referee for other nominations for Orders of Australia and for Australian of the Year. But so knowing the work that goes in, I felt very humbled that someone had actually bothered to do that. And also I thought, while I've just wanted to do stuff in my life, I hadn't really thought of that it would be anything worthy of any kind of nomination. I was even thinking that before we went into the room at Government House to get our medals, because you're all sitting in order and position that you're, with the other recipients. And, I spoke to the person on the left of me and said, so, what are you here for? And he'd actually founded the Men's Shed in Canberra 20 years earlier and built that into what it is. And I asked the person on my right, what are you here for? And she'd spent decades on the street working with drug addicts as a social worker and everything like that. And so then they asked me what I was here for, and I just said, well, I'm just a rower. It was, so it was humbling but exciting too. But I do think it's also, there've been so many people that I've worked with and who I've also helped support, and they've supported me and have influenced my development and me them. I actually feel it's I've kind of been singled out for part of a bigger group, and it belongs also to the people I've worked with over time and the volunteers I've worked with over time as well, because I've met some amazing people along the way that just are the ones who put their hands up to help stuff. Yeah.
Well, even you spoke earlier about a fellow head coach from Germany, I think it was, who was somewhat of a mentor for you.
Yes.
Are there any other people that stand out as having been mentors? Yeah,
well certainly my coach Roland Stocker, who who Merrick and I had when we were going for national championships. I mean, Roland, those who have been to Switzerland know this. Swiss live by the rules, and he was very, rules and ethical person. He set high ethical and moral standards, I think, for us, but high expectations in our personal discipline and organisation. And we used to joke all the time about Swiss timing. That's a training session. We'd have to start a workload. He'd be in the program, and we'd start this workload at 19 minutes past 6 from 6 kilometres away in East Basin. You'd row down there, he'd be counting down the clock to 19 minutes past 6, because that's when the stopwatch would start. So yes, he was very precise, but Roland was a strong influence, but really there've been a whole lot of people. I was very, as a young age, I was involved in, Cub Scouts and Venturers, and actually just, again, serendipity, ended up in the right groups there. So we had wonderful leaders who actually helped teach us a lot about working with others and leadership and social responsibility and things like that. So yeah, there are people along the way that help influence you, and the most recent would be my wife Adrienne. I just, ever since I met her and worked with her, I feel like I've been a better person, and she helped open my eyes. I've got a strong interest in the environment, both and the world around us, and she was someone who helped open my eyes earlier to that. I just kind of charged through things. I remember we were hiking early in our relationship. We were hiking in Gippsland, and I'm just charging along down the path, just looking at the bushes I've got to get out of the way. And Adrienne says, "Hey, look, up in the tree branch there's a powerful owl, very rare animal." And here it was, just blended in, and it just made me think, if I just look around, there's all this incredible stuff around us. And I started developing an interest in the world around us and the environment, and and that was Adrienne's influence. So yes, there are people all through our lives who we learn off, and the most recent for me has been my wife, Adrienne.
And you have developed an admiration for birdwatching yourself since then, right?
Yes. Oh yes, I have a little Guides to Birds of Australia, and it's got the little notes in it for sightings. And we now live on a bush block outside of Canberra, and it's host to a whole lot of native birds and mammals. So I've recorded over 50 species of native birds sighted there, and a lot of them do nest on the property as well. And 9 species of native mammals as well.
And you can recognise bird calls, do you think?
I've got pretty good at recognising bird calls. Yeah, and if I hear something different, I'll go and try and search and see what it is. And the same with mammals. The first time I saw a squirrel glider I was in the dark, just loading my rowing gear into the car for the next morning, and I just heard this very soft, quiet yapping happening from a tree branch outside. I'd never heard it before, and just went and got a branch, and it was a squirrel glider. So we do get sugar gliders around our area. I can identify their 3-bark yap, this was, and again, so it's just listening for the new things. And it's great. And my favourite things are where we live is I get to sleep by frogs at night and woken by the birds in the morning, and it's fantastic.
Beautiful natural sounds.
It's great. Yeah.
Well, throughout your career, what advice would you be able to have offered and be able to offer to individuals aspiring to leadership roles in sports administration?
Oh, in sports administration?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so in sports administration, look, I had an interesting lesson when I was actually asked to speak at Centrelink during Careers Week, and they had different topics during Careers Week of different presenters coming in. So as part of a group that came in of people who worked in different parts of sport. So there was someone from professional rugby league, there's someone there from rugby union, there's someone there from a state institute, someone from and so I was there from the Australian Institute of Sport. I was the last speaker to speak, and I was listening to all the others, and one thing I noticed, and so I mentioned this in my speech, was each one had a different pathway into working full-time in sport. A common theme though was at some stage they'd all volunteered, and I think people talk about graduates, talk about how you gain experience and get in there early. Well, there's a wealth of opportunities in volunteering to actually build that experience, and all of them had along the way played a role in volunteering in sport, and so I just mentioned that as a theme. So I just reckon if you want to work in sport, get out there and roll your sleeves up and actually get involved somewhere. Find somewhere that interests you, something you like, or the sport you enjoy. Get involved in the club or something like that. It's because being involved in that grassroots level, and I've maintained that involvement all the way through, has actually been a point of difference over other than highly experienced people at the high performance level in getting these development opportunities I've been able to do around the world in different countries, and was one of the things I understand that got me across the line and getting appointed to the Umpires Commission for World Rowing, was that I also had this grassroots experience I'd maintained all the way through my career in actually working at club level, of just putting bums on seats and getting them out and active. So I'd say that's the key thing, is just get involved, be active. The other thing, and it's the same with every career, is the opportunity that you might want to get to might not present itself immediately, but it's important you just keep yourself active doing something. So long as you're doing something, it puts you in a better position for when that opportunity comes up to be able to step into it.
And for athletes themselves as well, do you think that volunteering would reflect well upon the progression of their career as well, to be able to volunteer?
I think for me, it's I actually see it's a really valuable part of the whole sporting journey, because it's a bit it's one-dimensional. Being part of, like being a high-performance athlete is only one part of the sport, and you see it through a whole different side of actually working with other athletes. And then it becomes really rewarding when those athletes, through your working with them, get to achieve things. I'd encourage it. When I was, the group I had in China last week working with me, they were umpires and technical delegates, but in introducing each other, I've discovered that 25% of them are actually former national team members and former Olympians. So they were athletes who, post-career, had actually made the transition across to other parts of the sport, which is really good for the sport because they brought a great knowledge from the athlete's perspective of how it operates, at the levels that they'd been at. So I encourage everybody to be involved, and it's something we do try and do in our ANU boat club, the club I'm involved with, is to encourage sort of a mindset of just contributing to the club or to the sport locally in some way. So whether that's through a working bee or helping with umpiring or something like that, we 100% support and encourage that for everybody. But for those of us on the committee, we have to lead by example. So we all need to do that too. So I'm very proud that the club with the highest representation in rowing ACT rowing officials actually comes from this club. So this was a club that 18 years ago was about to shut its doors and fold, and had hardly any, just over a couple dozen members, and now it's one of the major contributors to the running of the sport locally. And the most recent national championships, we had one of our members as a national umpire, another one as a support technical officer, and another one as the commentator at the national championships. And that's out of the more than 150 national clubs around Australia, like more than 160 schools around Australia who are rowing. Was quite a strong representation from our club of these volunteer officials at the national championships at the national level. And now they're going gradually dribbling through also to international level. So the one who's commentating, he's now become an international commentator for World Rowing, but he was encouraged through this club to be able to develop his skills, and he's now commentating this year's World Championships in China.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that is Stuart John, who I have also had a chat with, so be sure to listen to his podcast.
Yeah, and a really interesting story, Stuart, and he's a wonderful person. And I've got to say, hearing him against other commentators at World Rowing events, he's one of the best.
There we go. And I feel that being part of the rowing community, I really do feel the importance of community and giving as much as you can, as well as contributing to athletically, but then to see how else you can assist build the community.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's often underestimated the role that sport plays. And I heard a story that a government department in Western Australia was working with remote Aboriginal communities there. Someone asked the question, if you changed one thing in your community to actually that would help make it better, what's the thing you'd do? And the majority answer was actually get a football team, because a sporting team actually creates a social focus. It actually engages younger people in a constructive physical activity. I think too is at a university club, when you're going through like the period of 18 to 23-year-old, you're imprinting a lot of the things you do and the behaviours and the attitudes that you actually carry through to your later life. And if we can keep people engaged in physical activity during that period, they're actually in a strong chance of remaining active through the rest of their lives. If you break your connection with physical activity through that 18 to 23 period, it can be really hard later on to actually re-engage in that once you've broken it. So I do like, every 10 years we have a reunion dinner for the club, and I do like seeing people that I coached 30 years ago actually as like healthy, active adults. And I like to think that perhaps we played a role in that, and actually keeping them, providing a means for them to stay engaged in physical activity while they were uni students actually has helped them to be able to do that for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, and to live fit and healthy lives.
Definitely.
Yes, and also to unite the community as well, to be supporting each other and drive for those goals.
Yeah, yes, definitely. And the community thing, like even again, universities underestimate the power of the sporting clubs. So for many university graduates, their strongest link back to the university is actually the clubs that they belong to at the university. And it surprises me every time that every 10 years we kind of throw this dinner. And last year for our the club's 60th anniversary, we had 190 members, going all the way back to the foundations in 1964, including the people who are at the founding annual general meeting. This is still one of their strongest connections to the university, is actually their connection to our club. Yeah.
There we go. And you made that happen. You stopped this club from folding.
Yeah, well, just to keep it going, and it's a constant challenge. Sometimes and most of the time it's just baby steps forwards, but you do look back after a few years of it and realise we've made a big leap. While I said when we started getting back involved in 2007, there was just an ancient fleet of mostly trashed and cannibalised boats, and now we've got a fleet of over $700,000 worth of boats sitting on the rack, and we've raised that money ourselves to be able to do that.
And a new pontoon to take off from.
And yes, a brand new world-class rowing pontoon to be able to launch from. So it's the same brand of pontoon that was used at the Olympic and Paralympic Games in France. We've now got just outside our boat shed door. And again, that was, and that was lobbying the University Sports Association to partner with the National Capital Authority, the government department that oversees the lake, to actually help co-fund a pontoon from us. But we have to do that work of actually joining those bits together and pitching to each of them to contribute towards a new facility.
And you have been a key figure as part of all of that.
Yeah, it's sometimes you feel like you're beating your head against a wall, but then you get little breakthroughs, and as I say, it's often just baby steps forward, but you keep pushing and keep making steps.
Mm-hmm. Please keep taking those baby steps.
Yes. Well, hopefully next time we might have an interview in a better facility, because we're actually sitting in one of ANU Sports. It is ANU Sports' oldest sporting facility. Is our now quite antique rowing shed, which we'd love to upgrade somewhere down the track. So that's the next big project.
It is a very humble shed, but we love it.
Yes. We produce good athletes. We don't necessarily produce good facilities.
Nick, thank you so much for your time with me. It's been wonderful to talk to you about all of this, because
Thanks.
I hear little bits and pieces, but I love being able to collaborate it all. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Gabby, and I'm glad not too many skeletons got revealed.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining me for this insightful journey through Nick Hunter's illustrious career. I do believe that his dedication to rowing and sports administration serves as an inspiration to many. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, leave a review, share it with fellow sports enthusiasts, and perhaps think about how you can be more involved in your own sporting community. Bye for now.